I'm Liam Kelly from the Institute of Asian Studies at University Brunei Darussalam, and I'm here today with Professor Victor T. King, Professor of Borneo Studies at the Institute of Asian Studies at University Brunei Darussalam, and we're going to talk about Borneo studies.
Yes, we're going to do it. So what do you want to know about Borneo?
So Borneo studies, that's a field that you have been in for your entire career, basically,
50
right?
50 years.
50
just
years,
about.
okay.
Early 1970s, I first started.
Well, that's before. That's almost before I was born. I was just a youngster,
Okay.
and obviously I didn't know anything about Borneo studies at that time. So
No, neither did I.
Right, exactly. So maybe you could help us out. Tell us a little bit about what it was like then and where it came from. And
I think when we talked before, we had an interview about my involvement in tourism.
Right.
And I said, it's all kind of coincidence and chance, and I never expected to go to Borneo to do fieldwork. And it so happened that my supervisor at, I was doing a master's degree at School of Oriental African Studies in London. And my supervisor, Barbara Ward, who I got on extraordinarily well with, whose husband happened to be Stephen Morris, who'd done a major study of the Milano in coastal Sarawak. So she did have some interest in Borneo at that time. But I was working on North Central Java. I thought that if I did a PhD, I'd stay in University of London and go to North Java and study what we used to call in those days peasant, farming communities.
Right.
In the north of Java. And that didn't happen. She then got a post at Clare College, Cambridge, and left SOAS. And I had a scholarship at SOAS, but there was really no one there to supervise me. But then I had another scholarship back in my old university in Hull, in the Centre for Southeast Asian Studies there. My supervisor was Mervyn Jaspin. So I went back to Hull, and he had just done a field visit to Sarawak, working with Tom Harrison and Benedict Zanden at the Sarawak Museum. And he kind of fell in love with Sarawak. He said, you should go to Borneo. And I said, well, I don't know anything about Borneo. I've never really, I've not read anything up on Borneo. What am I supposed to do? He said, I think, don't just go to Sarawak, then go to Kalimantan, to Indonesian Borneo, and do your major field study there, and that's how it ended up. So so from Java I went to Borneo, and I suppose I didn't really regret it. I mean, I think it did. It was very positive for the development of my career because very few people had worked in Indonesian Borneo in Kalimantan at that time. You could count them on one hand. I remember corresponding with Herb and Pat Whittier, who just returned from doing field work among the Kenya in East Kalimantan. I also corresponded with Alf Hudson and his wife Judith, who'd worked down in South Kalimantan, and he did a major PhD thesis, which I relied on a lot. Doug Miles, Australian guy who'd worked in Central Kalimantan, and there were a scatter of other people, mainly sort of missionaries and others who'd worked in different parts of Kalimantan. But that was about it, and you just had to rely on historical material, so I had to learn to read Dutch. Couldn't really speak it terribly well, but so I was reading in the Dutch literature as well, and it was a kind of pioneer area for me at that time. So that's how I sort of got into it.
Okay, so obviously a very pioneering area. If you're studying Borneo, you basically know all the other people who are studying Borneo.
It's a small field.
Right. Really, but then I've heard of this thing, the Borneo Research Council. What was that? That sounds like an organized approach to the study of Borneo.
Yeah, I mean, it was founded by Dr. George Appel, who'd done work in, what was then British North Borneo, Sabah. And he worked among the Rungas Duzon. And he came up with this idea that we should have a council, we should have a research council.
Okay.
So he founded it in the late 60s. And that by chance, I happened to meet him because he was visiting Yorkshire. He had, I think, a research position in Denmark. And Borneo Research Council was just emerging at that time. He established a bulletin, annual publication. And I chanced to meet him. He came to our university at that time. And he said, oh, you're going to Borneo? I said, yeah, I'm probably going to Borneo. So he said, well, join the council and, keep in touch with me. And I've got this substantial correspondence with him over many years. Sadly, he's just departed. He's recently died. But so I kept up with him, and I suppose I owe him a lot as well in kind of contribution to my career. But then I decided that I didn't really want to stay in Kalimantan studies, as it were. And so I then moved to Sarawak, and I was doing work in Sarawak. And then that was on resettlement, land development, agricultural development, things of that kind. So I did study there. And while I was in Sarawak, I thought, Brunei, I know virtually nothing about Brunei. So I first came here in 1981 and thought, well, maybe I could do some research in Brunei, which was actually quite difficult at that time. It was quite restrictive then. And so talking to various people around, because UBD wasn't founded until the mid-80s, so the only institutions you could work through would be the Brunei Museum and the Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka, the language and literature bureau. So I attached myself to the museum, and they said, well, help us out with our ethnographic collections, work on those. They weren't really happy about me doing field research at that time. Okay. There had been field research done by 3 American anthropologists in the 70s, but not, it was rather more difficult to do that in the 80s. So I spent a sabbatical here in the Brunei Museum in 1985 and got into that. I also did side visits to Sabah and got sort of interested. I've not done any serious fieldwork in Sabah, but at least I was in contact with people who were working on development issues and things of that kind. So I kind of, I think I developed a sort of rounded view in a way of Borneo. What tends to happen, I think, or what tended to happen amongst academics is that, you would work in the former British parts of, British governed parts of Borneo, Sarawak, Sabah, Brunei, or you worked in the Dutch area. But you never really cross boundaries. And I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, I've done some work in Kalimantan. I go to other parts of Borneo. I'll do some work in Sarawak, Brunei, and that's how it happened. So I tend to think that, I developed a sort of broader view, if you like. Maybe I lost in-depth kind of knowledge in a way by traveling around too much, but comparatively, I think that was an advantage.
Do those divisions still exist today? Is there still a tendency to people to either work on Kalimantan or a different place? I see.
That's and perhaps I can advertise.
Yeah, I mean, so since you've and in your time here at the Institute of Asian Studies, one of the things you've done is produce this book, Borneo Studies in History, Society, and Culture. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about this work.
Yeah, and this had a checkered history as well. I've never really, when I look back on it over almost 50 years now, I don't think I've ever really planned my career. It's all been, I say, chance and coincidence and encounters with certain people who pushed you in a particular direction. So when I came, I'd been here in 1981. That was my first visit to Brunei. Then I'd worked in the Brunei Museum 84, 85. And I was coming back, I was external examiner in sociology and anthropology here at UBD when I was founded. So I kept in close touch with Brunei, but then I came back in 2012 as a visiting professor. And that was when Professor Tong, here as the advisor of the Vice Chancellor, he'd established this Institute of Asian Studies. And he'd invited me, so I came in. So I thought, well, what can I do? I thought, well, let's do some stock taking of Borneo. Let's invite scholars from around Borneo, and so we invited people from Sarawak, from Sabah, obviously from Brunei itself. A few people from Kalimantan as well. And then this was a kind of gestation thing, and the book emerged, and it came from an idea of Dr. Pauline Bala, who's in Kuching now. She's at UNIMAS, and she said, "Why don't we put a book together?" Mm-hmm. So this was, the doorstep of a book. This is a monster of a book, 25 chapters, 600 pages. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Yeah, let's put a book together." Well, what happened then was I left Brunei. Well, I left in 2012. I came back in 2013 for a couple of months. Then I got an attachment to Chiang Mai University in 2014. I was teaching there for 4 or 5 months in development studies. And I'd sort of distanced myself a bit from Borneo, from Brunei at that time. Came back here for a couple of months in 2015, and then got this 3-year contract from 2017. Mm-hmm. In that sort of period, this book idea had languished. And it was only my dear old friend Zawawi Ibrahim, who was here that time, and Noor Hasharina, on the staff here as well, who kind of rescued it and got in touch with me and said, "Come on, we've got to get this book out."
Right, okay. Uh-huh.
So we kind of went back to it in about 2015, and it came out in 2017. Mm-hmm. And I'm rather proud of it. I mean, I think we did a good job, and we were trying to get some sort of balance across the region. Again, difficult to get chapters on Kalimantan.
Okay.
But we managed to get, I think four chapters, 3 written by Indonesians and 1 an American scholar who had worked in museums in Kalimantan. And then there were some general chapters which also included Kalimantan in that. But I always feel, goodness, we should have had more material on.
Why is it that it's difficult to get work on Kalimantan?
Fewer scholars have worked there.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of local Indonesian scholars
Right.
work there, but they tend to publish in Indonesian.
Right.
And then you invite them and say, "Well, look, can you write us something in English?" Mm-hmm. So invariably, you either have to translate something, or they say no. They're not willing to do it. And then we got several chapters on Sarawak. I think 3 on Brunei. Even on Sabah, we were struggling to get material on Sabah, and I think we ended up with 2 chapters on Sabah. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's a little bit uneven. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would have liked a greater degree of balance across the island, but unfortunately we couldn't.
Okay. Yeah, so you said the idea behind this book was a kind of stock taking of scholarship, and from your perspective now, where do you see scholarship on Borneo? What are its strengths, and what are its challenges?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. I'm professor of Borneo studies, and it's a sort of academic construct in a way. Okay,
Southeast Asia history.
It's an island, okay, but it's still divided politically.
Right.
Part of course is Federation of Malaysia with the 2 Malaysian Borneo states, and part of course the Republic of Indonesia, and then the independent Sultanate of Brunei. So in a way, I think that still makes it rather difficult to get a sort of overall view of Borneo. But having said that, it has representatives of 3 nation states in one island.
Right.
And comparatively, I think that's interesting. I think that's a big strength.
I see.
If you're working in Borneo and you get the chance to go to different parts of the island and do comparative work, I think that's a big strength, really. But don't lose sight of the fact that Borneo is a part of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's divided into 3 nation states. And so you have to understand Sarawak and Sabah, you have to understand, say, the politics and history of Malaysia.
Right.
In Kalimantan, you have to be able to read into Dutch history and things of that kind, because it's part of the Republic of Indonesia. So, it's quite a demanding task, I think, to command the whole of Borneo. And when I look back on it, I think, well, I wrote this general book, The Peoples of Borneo. But it had all kinds of imperfections, some factual errors as well that I regret. But anyway, And I was trying to make sense of the island as a whole.
So sorry, when did you write that?
It was published in 1993 by Blackwell, Oxford at that time. And it was in a series, general series, that the series editors were Ian Glover and Peter Bellwood, who actually is an archaeologist, prehistorian. And so I had to have a kind of chunk of the book that was devoted to that early period of the development of Borneo cultures and societies and economies. And you know, I was on very thin ice at that time. I mean, I wasn't an archaeologist or prehistorian at all. I had to read up on all this stuff.
Okay.
So I think those were sort of imperfections in a way in the book. And I thought about revising it and then putting in a new edition. But then I thought, no, I can't do it. I've just left it, and I've gone on to I've gone to other things. And I suppose this, in a way, this edited book that we've done is a sort of substitute, in a way, for me not doing a revised version of edition of the Borneo book I published. But and again, I sort of dip in and out of Borneo. I mean, of course, I'm still working on it and publishing on Borneo peoples and cultures. But I'm doing lots of other things as well. I mean, I'm a sort of generalist. I do a lot of stuff on Southeast Asia. More generally, I'm doing work on tourism in Thailand now. Though I don't speak Thai, I have to work with people who do. But so it has a future. But I think the future is really in Borneo itself. I know the Borneo Research Council is based in the US. I mean, it was founded by George Appel. It's done marvelous work, you know, and it's given Borneo studies that sort of profile, I think, that it would never have had it not been for George and his colleagues who worked on this. But I think, you know, and they realise it, and the Borneo Research Council has tried to situate itself more firmly within Borneo itself and used representatives here. It has a biennial conference. So all that's important, but I think the future is really here in the universities in Borneo, in UBD, in Sarawak and Sabah, the universities in Kalimantan. I think that's where the future
Well, if they move the capital of Indonesia to Kalimantan, then that's totally going to change things.
That's going to be a massive transformation for Borneo. And I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I mean, there's all kinds of worries, anxieties about the amount of environmental impact.
Well, that's what Borneo Studies is for.
That new capital will produce. You know, there will be large areas of rainforest and so on that will go, because it won't just be the capital. I mean, it will spread out from there. Its influence will be much greater. So environmentally, for me, it's a worry. But okay, the Indonesian government goes ahead with it, and so be it. But
So an interesting future for Borneo, and more things for Borneo Studies to look at.
Yeah, so I think it most certainly has a future. I mean, there's so much more that we can do. There are so many populations in the region that have not been looked at, studied, researched.
I see.
There's a lot to do there. I think the big issue is an environmental one. I mean, I really do think that environmentally, Borneo, because of the rainforest issues and things of that kind, is a very important part of the world to look at. It's not just Amazonia, and I've just done a book on Amazonia as well.
You're writing a book on Amazonia?
We're editing two, but there's one coming out with Routledge on territorial dynamics and populations of Amazonia, which I'm working on with a Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese friend of mine, and academic who's based in Germany. I like to kind of spread my...
I think you're trying to take the legacy of every major anthropologist out there, from Clifford Geertz to Levi Strauss, and it's, impressive.
Yeah. We're also doing a book at the moment, my colleague Jeremy Jones is doing a book on fieldwork, which you contributed to. And, looking at the work of people like Levi Strauss and other distinguished anthropologists, and, how their selves, as it were, their personalities, their individual motivations and things of that kind have actually impacted on what they have produced.
I see,
So it's not just scientific ethnography in a sense, it's I mean, some of these are almost, you could call them literary works.
Right. No, I think that's the great contribution of anthropologists, is not only studying other people, but then studying yourself as you're studying other people. Right.
Yeah.
And trying to figure all that out.
Yeah.
As historians, we studied from that work of anthropologists to think about how you look at sources and what you're doing, right?
So it's sort of science, but not science. You know, there is an important kind of autobiographical, literary element to it as well.
So that work is called Fieldwork and the Self, right? And that's
we're publishing it with Springer in this series. I just had a word with someone at Springer who's dealing with it, who's saying they're not too impressed with the title, and that we may have to change.
Okay, so will there be something more exciting?
Yeah, it's got to be a much more exciting title.
Okay. Well, I think that's a lot to look forward to, and there's a lot here in Borneo studies for us to look back at and to continue to learn from. And so I want to thank you for sitting down and telling us a little bit about Borneo studies and get us excited about
enjoyed it, really.
Fieldwork in the South.
Very enthusiastic about it all the time.